It's this sort of moral center of believing in something that's larger than himself.
The guy is such an inspiration.
You can come from nowhere and you can make something out of yourself.
Lincoln's depression motivated him to overcome.
That admirable person that we should be looking up to and trying to emulate.
Who is dedicated in their life to change things.
I find there's a lot about Lincoln to be admired.
Well, let me put it to you this way, Joe. I'm glad to be here with another Lincoln buff and sharing time talking about our favorite subject.
I think I first heard you talk about Lincoln up the county seat in Woodford County, and you're talking about Lincoln. And I was in the background there, and I asked you about Long Nine Museum, and you gave a good word for Long Nine Museum. That was about 5 or 6 years ago, and I scratched my head and I thought, how does this guy know about everything?
Well, that's a stretch, and I love that Metamora Courthouse, by the way.
That's where we were at.
Yeah, that's a real Lincoln site.
It was one of those early Lincoln Legacy annual events for attorneys that Ron Spears puts together,
right.
and you and others.
Right. No, that's I love that courthouse. The other one's, of course, Mount Pulaski, which is, the difference is the Metamora Courthouse has chosen to make the first floor a museum, which is, it's a good museum. They got good exhibits, and the upper floor is the courtroom exactly as it was. But Mount Pulaski, the basement, or the first floor rather, is like it was. So you're really almost going into the courthouse untouched.
And of course, you're the author of Lincoln riding the circuit and going through all those county courthouses. And I think at Metamora, what we're talking about, that's where Lincoln did a murder trial, and his client somehow escaped out of the county or something.
Right.
And I forget all the details.
Melissa Goins case. And Melissa Goins had an abusive husband who was constantly beating her up. And finally, one time, she just had had enough, so she reached behind her for a piece of firewood by the fireplace, and she hit him over the head, not intending to kill him, but intending just to get him off her. And he died. So she was charged with murder. So Lincoln defended the case. Now, mind you, the juries were all men. The judge, of course, was a man, and we can't have women killing their husbands. So the thing was going badly, and he saw that this was not going well, because she was going to get hung if she got convicted. So he asked for a recess, because she said she wanted to drink water. So they went downstairs. You can still go down those stairs from that courtroom to one of the rooms they went to, and so she said, you're going to get me to drink water? He said yes, but the best water I know is in the Tennessee River. And so she did, hopped out the window, and then just scooted and got out and got away.
So what did the jury do on the case?
They dismissed the jury, but here, people, of course, there are those.
So the trial never finished, basically?
No, but tight scholars that really want documentation. There's no record of this. It was other than there's no record. The guy in the clerk's office years later recited the story, so that's where it came from. So I won't mention scholars, but I was with somebody once on a Lincoln tour, and they said, "You're not putting that case in your book, are you?" I said,
your book you're talking about.
Yeah, I said, "Of course I am." And he said, "Well, it's probably legend." And I said, let me tell you something. Lincoln was in Metamora in 1858 during the Douglas campaign. He took the time to go over to the courthouse and get her bond discharged. So that pretty well confirms that she had a bond, she fled, and he took care of it, cleaning it up at the end.
Multifaceted Lincoln. And since we're in this building at 423 through 427 East Washington Street in Springfield, where across the street Lincoln and Willie Herndon had their law office. I know you've got some notes of things you want to talk about. I just want to say what makes this building special for me as the owner of the building. Now, I don't know how I got to be so fortunate. My wife and I own the building, but the builder of this building and the owner of the building when Lincoln went off to Washington, D.C. as president was John Rawle. And John Rawle, 6 years younger than Lincoln, earlier in life, when Lincoln was a young man in the 1830s, John Rawle helped Lincoln build that flatboat, which Lincoln took down to New Orleans on the Sangamon River, then the Illinois River, then all the way down to the Mississippi. John Rawle did not accompany Lincoln on that trip, but they built it at Sagamotown along the Sangamon River. And we've got this documented, the stories that were passed down. And John Rawle was a friend of Lincoln, the owner of this building at the time. And so then the other connection, several connections this building has to Lincoln. But when Lincoln and his family, Mary and I guess two of the boys by then, went off to Washington, D.C., they had to do something with their dog Fido.
Right.
And so they gave their dog Fido, they put it in the care of John Rawle and his family, who had young boys equivalent age to Lincoln. And so that's how this building is also connected to Lincoln with the Fido, Lincoln's loyal dog. So that's all I got to say right now.
No, let me ask you if you know this about, in our time, a lot of dogs were referred to as Fido. Do you suppose that the first Fido was Lincoln's dog? I mean, we'll never know, but were there other Fidos at the time, or is that where it all started? I've often wondered.
Good question. Fido is a Latin abbreviation for loyalty or allegiance.
That makes sense, yeah. Fidelity.
Fidelity.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
That's a good, I wonder.
We can't ever find that one out. We can make it up.
Yeah, there's no registry of dogs back then, so to document it accurately.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to mention that are sort of disjointed, but one is when Lincoln took the train in February to go to Washington. He took a long train ride because the American people didn't know much about him. So he wanted to expose himself to the American people. So rather than a direct route, which was 800 miles, and you probably know a lot of this, but he went to Columbus, Ohio, and then across to went to Cleveland, and then up to the Mohawk Valley and across the Mohawk Valley. And by the way, when he was running, this is an aside about this trip, but when he was running for president, this young girl wrote him a letter, and this sounds like Lincoln lore, but the letter's documented, and so is his response to her, to tell him he'd be more attractive if he had a beard. So he grew the beard, and this woman, and this young lady, it was still not quite out at that time when you see the pictures of him. But this young lady came down to the train with her father and met him at the train site as he went to Washington.
I recently read a book about that trip you're talking about, where Lincoln starts out from the capital of Illinois, goes through the capital of Indiana,
right,
the capital of Ohio, capital of Pennsylvania, capital of New York, then I think through New Jersey, the capital of Jersey, and then eventually to D.C. And I think he gave like 100 speeches during that 13 days, and 2 assassination attempts of one kind or another. And he wore out his hands, shaking hands. I mean, a president that was trying to, reaffirm his position as a president of the people, by the people, for the people, and meeting as many people as he can along the way, and significant stops along the way.
I think he even went to Harrisburg, which was not, he had to go west to get to Harrisburg from Philadelphia, and he went to the Independence Hall, gave a wonderful speech in Independence Hall. Yeah, that was quite a trip. But my anecdote about it is early in the trip, the train rolled into Tolono, Illinois, which is a little town 10 miles from Urbana, and Lincoln came out to the back of the train. He steps out on the back of the train and gave a speech, which I always was amazed by its brevity and its directness and its message. And the speech was this: "Let us believe, as some poet has expressed it. Behind the clouds, the sun is still shining. A beautiful line. But then years later, many, many years later, I went to Longfellow's home in Portland, Maine, and we had one of these docents that you'd expect to find in Massachusetts. Like, people from the Midwest aren't really cultured, but I'll try to help them out, you know. So she said, in this room is where Longfellow wrote perhaps his most famous poem. And he was suffering in a period of depression. So the famous line in that poem is, "Let us hope that behind the clouds the sun is still shining." And so the difference is, in his depression, number one, he made it, is the sun still shining? Lincoln, in his moment, made it a positive statement. The sun is still shining. But the reason I tell the story, it tells us how brilliant this man was. He steps out on the train and comes up with Longfellow's poem that he'd read sometime, Lord knows where, but he remembered it enough and paraphrased it to fit his situation. So that's one of my favorite Lincoln stories.
And given Lincoln's early history in life, you know, you mentioned the Depression, or, you know, suggesting you have to overcome what's in the way, you know, the clouds in the way of the sun, but in life there's so much in the way oftentimes. So when Lincoln, as a young boy, he's got to experience his mother dying from milk poisoning from the cows that ate the wrong plant, and had to hear her, you know, for I don't know how many days or nights suffering away, and then dying, and then some years later, when Lincoln's still a teenager, his daughter, Thomas Lincoln's daughter, Abraham Lincoln's sister, is in childbirth and out in the middle of nowhere, and then she dies, and I think the baby dies too. Do you have any recollection of that situation?
Yeah, no, I agree. You're right.
Maybe you can explain it better than I could. But then Lincoln, and then Tim Meehan, who's in the next room over there, he talks about years later when Lincoln returns to Indiana, where he grew up in part, that there was a teenager that went kind of crazy and was, you know, nonstop yelling. But Lincoln wrote a poem about that experience years later, and a beautiful poem. How does a man, I think how many stanzas, 20 or 30 stanzas that rhyme and everything?
Yeah, he's got several poems from that Indiana period that are just from that spell. It's just one more sign of his brilliance. He was amazing. But to emphasize, for years I knew that his mother died when he was 9. Is that right?
I think that's about right.
But I never thought till recently. I heard a speaker talk about his depression recently, and he had to, in that one-room cabin, he had to watch her die. And I cannot imagine that. Now, if we have a dying relative that's dear to us, we visit him in the hospital. But every 24 hours a day, he was faced with his mother's death like that. It's just amazing. And there's, as you know, there's a book on his depression, which says it was a depression. I'm not a psychiatrist, of course, but depression can be a good thing if it doesn't go too far. And Lincoln's depression motivated him to overcome his bad things and do things to make himself better. So it was a positive thing in his life.
And so during that time period, when Lincoln's about 8 or 9 and his mother passes away, dies in a horrendously awkward and ugly, you know, health experience, and Lincoln's sister is with them. She's a couple years older. Right. And I've been telling this story that there were just the two of them in that cabin when Thomas Lincoln goes into Elizabethtown, Kentucky to find his next mate, his spouse, to take care of the children. But I guess Dennis Hanks, a cousin, was with them doing that. There was 3 in that small.
Yeah, it was almost a lean-to, I think. I don't know if it was even a cabin as such. It was a pretty primitive structure. But no, it's amazing to be left in the wilderness.
For a month.
And there's wolves out there, there's bears out there, yeah.
And they had to feed themselves and take care of themselves. That shows how it was.
Right.
The kind of wilderness, or the type of back, I don't know the right way to say it, but
it was pretty much wilderness.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, right.
All the situations you deal with when you're in that environment.
And then I think of he came with his family from Indiana and ended up setting up a homestead on the banks of the Sangamon with his father. And the story about him and his father not being a good person and tough on him, I think his father gets sort of a bun rap, but he didn't understand this. Here's this kid that reads books and all that. Why isn't he out working in the field? So the father, it was a stretch maybe for him to understand this kid and appreciate the kid. But this Sarah Bush Johnson you mentioned, the second mom, I think did appreciate him and was probably one of the bright spots in his life.
They stayed one winter on the banks of the Sangamon River,
right.
And it happened to be about the worst winter anyone could remember.
Yes.
With the snow.
The winter of the deep snow in 1830, yeah.
1830.
Right.
They just kept persevering.
Right. And yeah, we can't appreciate a snow like that because all the critters died. So I don't know what they did for food. Because there were no squirrels around, no nothing, and they couldn't go out. The snow was so deep. It was a disastrous winter, but somehow they all survived it. But that was then not for that reason, but that's when he left to go to New Salem.
And I think now, when did Lincoln go down to New Orleans the first time on the Ohio River to the Mississippi to New Orleans?
I'm not sure the date of that.
Yeah,
that was from Indiana.
That's what I was thinking.
Right.
And so he had that experience, and so that gave him the confidence to do it. Was he in charge of the flatboat that he took from the Sangamon River?
Yes. And that was, of course, from Sangamo Town, and I'm not sure where Sangamo Town is. Do you know?
Well, it's
the upstream.
It's upstream from here, and it's on the way to. On the way to Petersburg.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
About 1/3 of the way there.
So it was from there that he went to down to New Salem and got stuck on the dam.
Got stuck.
Now that launches me into another topic. Think where this nation would be if Abraham Lincoln, if Lincoln hadn't got stuck on the dam.
Yeah.
He sailed on down, maybe made enough success of that to become a farmer, but he never would have found New Salem. And New Salem's story to me is mystic because, number one, he got stuck there, and which led to him going to the village. We're all total strangers, but the village was almost typecast for this wayward guy coming in. You had a Dartmouth graduate who was a doctor, who was a staunch Presbyterian, named Allen. You had Kelso, this sort of ne'er-do-well that loved to fish and read books, but he taught Lincoln to read books. And then you had this mentor Graham, the teacher there, why he would be in New Salem, but he taught him arithmetic, and taught him grammar. That's part of the New Salem story. Everybody there was sort of added something to his life. So when he left there in 1937 and to move on, he was a different person than the guy that got stuck on the dam. So we can ask again, where would we be today if that hadn't happened? And there's a book, Kirkin's Grammar, that he used in New Salem, and that book. It's a sort of a story in and of itself. That book was called Kirkham's Grammar, and it was published in the 1820s, and it was the main primer for literature, for grammar in those days. And he walked miles to get a copy of it, like 3 or 4 miles, or 6. I think it was 6 miles, and brought it back to New Salem, and supposedly studied with Anne Rutledge. And the book has written in it, Anne Rutledge studied grammar. And they say that there's a dispute. They say Lincoln wrote that, but then there are other people dispute it. But the point is, there's no question that he studied with that book, because it was handed down by the Rutledge family, who had the tavern, and the parents, and a brother of Anne's was a friend of his who died tragically shortly after she did. But that book was handed down through the years till it ended up with a member of the family in Iowa who gave it to Decatur Public Library, who had the woman there had enough sense to give it to the Library of Congress. So it's in the Library of Congress, and I've actually had to put gloves on, but I got to handle that book, and it just, wait, what? I'm handling a book that Abraham Lincoln was handling when he was like 20 years old or 25 years old. It was a remarkable experience.
I've heard you kind of tell the same story, but for this happening, our nation would have become two nations,
right?
Because Lincoln would not have ascended to be the leader and the president that he became. But I think you've made the same point with Anne Rutledge. Had he, that love that evidently was there between him and Rutledge at some level of affection, had she survived and not died, and they had become husband and wife, then Lincoln may have had a very different life. He would have been
absolutely
not the same life he had with Mary Todd.
He would have just no, I think. And I've studied that Anne Rutledge story enough because it's disputed, but I believe it's true. And she died in 1935 of typhoid, and I think of typhoid, and it just really set him back for a long time. So that was another loss. You got his mother, his sister, now this woman that he, if you believe the story, which most people do, at least me, I'm one, and I talk about it a lot. I've given several talks on it, and also talking about the non-believers who I dismiss in my talk. But just one thing after another. But it made him tougher, I think, to do the things that he ultimately had to do. You want to say anything about his marriage?
You're very equipped to do so.
No, I think, for one thing, she was charming, and I think it's quite conceivable that he fell for her. So that part, why this woman of privilege would marry this nondescript lawyer is always amazing, unless she saw in him something that we all know was there. And so I give her credit for that. And how much did they had difficulties in their marriage, there's no question about that. But how much did those difficulties provoke him to do other things with his life, like being out on the circuit? Most of the guys went home or didn't go the whole two months. But Lincoln did go out always, never came home, was always out. And he was one of the few guys of whom that was true.
That means like for months at a time.
Yeah, months at a time. Yeah, it was
on horseback.
On horseback, 400 to 500 miles, spring and fall, and not, as I say, he didn't go home. So there's a lot of question about their marriage. On the other hand, you think of her and whether it was she kept slipping mentally, I think, emotionally, I should say. And you think about it. She loses her son, Eddie. Then she loses her son, Willie, who was really the apple of their eye, they say. So that's two sons she loses. Then her husband's brains end up in her lap. And then Tad, who was the son that was her only companion in life after Lincoln's assassination, then he died. So why wouldn't she be disturbed and grieving?
Besides the fact that her father was a slave owner, and didn't her brothers fight on the Confederacy side, and one of them died?
Point. Yeah, that's a good point too. Excellent point.
A lot of turmoil, a lot of conflict there.
I think it was a son-in-law, or I think maybe it was a niece that whose husband was killed in the war. She was from Kentucky and lived with them in the family. She was almost like a daughter for a while to him. So they were very close, and so then that happened there. Yeah, and let's give her credit. Here's these people fighting to destroy the Union, hating her husband. That's her family. and she loyally sticks by him. There's no question about that. So I give her higher marks than a lot of people.
And getting back to Lincoln, thinking about who might become his mate and so forth, and so Anne Rutledge dies. Then I learned something recently about this Mary Owens situation. They kind of were thinking about getting together, but I didn't realize that Mary Owens had a sister that lived in New Salem.
Right.
So there's that's an interesting connection, and I think Lincoln respected that sister a great deal. I think she was kind of an educated woman, knew a lot about more so than the average woman at the time.
Right.
But then, so the Mary Owens situation goes nowhere ultimately. But then with Mary Todd, they were close to getting married. Then they break up for a while, and then they're separated. They have a cooling off period or an estrangement period.
Yeah, the fatal 1st of January, he called. Yeah, they just did call it off. He was in he was in a depressive state. He was going back and forth with Speed, his best friend, who now since left for Kentucky.
Joshua Speed,
who he met in Springfield, who then returned to his Kentucky home. And so all of this was going on, at the time. And but it was just some more turmoil that he had to deal with.
Do you remember how much time passed between when they almost got married and then when they decided to actually get married again?
Yeah, I think it was like, well, I'll tell you, it was almost like 8 months or so. And by the way, here's the Michael Burlingame raises this point. They got married just out of the blue. They went through this courtship, and then he broke it off, or they broke it off, and then out of the blue, they ended up marrying, I'll say November 1st of 1842, maybe, or 41, and then literally 9 months later, Robert Todd is born. So one theory is Lincoln had his way with her. This is terrible gossip.
Yeah, we don't know if we want this on the video.
No, but those dates are immutable. I mean, so
that kind of reminds me of my dad when he gets back from World War II. It's exactly 9 months that my eldest brother is born. I only have a sister. Exactly 9 months. So those things do happen.
Right. I mean. but so perhaps the marriage was one of guilt. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't know, but I shouldn't have gone into all that maybe, but it's an interesting story.